Who likes ads? I hate ads interrupting my favorite shows. In an effort to keep the show ad-free, we have set up a Patreon account. The show will always be free to listen to, but unfortunately, it isn't free to produce. If you would like to donate to the show and help us out, please go to www.patreon.com/The Unseen Paranormal Podcast. That is patreon.com/The Unseen Paranormal Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to another episode of The Unseen Paranormal, where some of the scariest things are unseen. I'm your host, Eric Freeman. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Today we are chatting with Martha Hazzard Decker. Martha is a paranormal researcher, author, and investigator, and a retired police detective and death investigator. She's been investigating the paranormal since 1999 and is the founder of East Texas Paranormal. Her newest book, Haunted Hill House, Where Spirits Speak, is about the famous Hill House in Mineral Wells, Texas. The house has been featured on various TV shows such as Portals of Hell and Paranormal Declassified, and is considered by many the most haunted house in the U.S. You can find Martha's books on Amazon, Kindle, and wherever fine books are sold. Hey, Martha, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
So, like I said, you are a retired police detective and death investigator, and you started investigating the paranormal in 1989. So how did you get into the paranormal from being in the police world and first responder world?
Oh, well, I was into with the paranormal long before then, just because activity started happening around me. My earliest memory, I was about 4, but what I turned around and did is I applied my law enforcement education and abilities into the paranormal.
Yeah, and so you founded East Texas Paranormal in 2007.
Right. I did that after I retired from the police department, just because of where I am in East Texas. Yeah, I needed to wait until I had retired. Now, there's people that were around the area that knew about me investigating. I just had to kind of just keep it fairly quiet, just so that defense attorneys wouldn't have too much fun with it on any felony cases.
Yeah, because it seems like with police officers, they're kind of hush-hush about paranormal occurrences and stuff like that if they have any on the job.
Right, because if you're somebody who ends up investigating cases, filing cases, you have to be really careful about what people know about. And, there's those in the law enforcement that have known that I would do this, all along. But you don't want to have your credibility attacked in a court.
Right.
On a case. So you'd have to just kind of be careful. So I started probably, like I said, in 99, officially investigating, but very quietly. But I also would do that because I would go to places like Jefferson, Texas, where almost the entire downtown has activity, more as a means of actually getting away from law enforcement.
Yeah.
Because while I was at home, I was pretty much on call 24/7. Some of the officers asked me, do you ever sleep? Because I was able to, get that call in the middle of the night. I'm wide awake. I think over all the years, there was only one phone call that I had from an officer in the middle of the night that after we hung up, I go, oh, crap. And I have to call him right back and tell him, don't do what I just said. That was, I don't even remember what it was, but I was half asleep. Usually I'm awake. As soon as my eyes are open, I'm awake. And it wasn't anything extremely serious. And, everything would have been okay if he had followed through, but it just wasn't the proper procedure.
Yeah.
So, but it was like, stop. Don't do that. Because some of the guys, it seemed like at times I'd have to play 20 questions to get the information I needed to make an informed decision on how they needed to proceed.
So you don't hear a lot, like you said, because credibility and they might call your credibility into question. So you don't hear a lot of stories from police officers. Did you ever have anything paranormal happen while you were on the job?
Say when I was working patrol, and there was an open door, open window that I was called to investigate. I'd say probably 9 out of the 10 times when I got there, if I was there by myself while I was waiting for backup, and I have no idea how it works. I just know that I was able to stand at the door or the window, and somehow I was able to discern whether there was anybody in the building at that time or not. And I still kind of use that to this day. I used it when I worked with the state, when I had one of the tasks I had was finding people trying to hide from the agency. I use it to this day while I'm working. One of the things I do is I work as a process server, and process servers are the people who deliver documents related to any kind of court case.
Yeah.
Whether it's a subpoena or whatever. Yeah. So I still use that when I'm at somebody's house. Maybe somebody doesn't want to get papers, or they know a divorce is coming, or maybe that, a debt collection lawsuit or something, just whatever. I mean, there's all sorts of, because everything goes through that process with the court. And every once in a while I'm wrong, but most of the time when I know nobody's there, there's nobody there. So I still use it to this day with that. I used to use it when I was interviewing or interrogating suspects. I use it interviewing witnesses. I still use that, the same thing today when I'm speaking to people, when I'm trying to locate someone to deliver the court papers. For example, too, when I would patrol and I was working late night shift,
yeah,
I would often drive around in the neighborhood, lights, dark, lights out on the vehicle, windows rolled down. And when you do that, it's amazing how much more you can actually see when you're out there driving around and looking for trouble. But sometimes it would be trouble. I've caught a few people, climbing into doors, burglaries that way. But sometimes there's other things you'd see. I used to see shadows here and there, all sorts of stuff that, of course, when you go do your double take, it's gone.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of people that had, if they came to our department and it was something kind of funky or odd, it didn't matter who it was talking to the people, whether it was one of the officers, the chief, or the judge, they would refer me to them, and I would take those. I would always take those and talk with them. And there was one family that did have stuff going on in the house they had bought. A young couple with a 6-year-old boy. The 6-year-old boy was talking to somebody who wasn't there. They had lights that would go off and on in a certain part of the house on their own. In the newer part of it, they had a dog that used to bark at a specific closet. If the closet door was left open, he would just stand there and bark into that closet. And after I went out there, and I did go out there, and I kind of sat around and did just a real basic interview of them and kind of get a feel of the place, take some base readings. And after I did that, that was the end of that. They didn't have any more activity.
Huh.
Their son quit talking to whoever it was. I do know when they were having it renovated before they moved in, the people that were doing the renovations had found a bag of bones somewhere. I don't know if it was in the house, under the house, or where, but they threw all that away. They didn't call anybody or anything. They just threw it in with a pile of everything else that was, tossing out, because they were replacing carpet and, just all that sort of typical stuff.
Yeah. I mainly want to talk about, the Hill House, but I wanted to ask you about that because it's hard to get any first responders. I know from coming from the EMS world to talk about the paranormal stuff, a lot of them, because it's still kind of taboo in that world. And so here's some of those stories of you actually having experiences on the job, is pretty awesome.
Yeah. And some of the others, there's getting to be a lot more that are more open about that. And I know a number of people in law enforcement and, EMT world, paramedic world that are talking about it. I guess because there's so many shows on TV, it's becoming a little more and more mainstream.
Yeah.
So I got a call a few years ago from a deputy that I hadn't talked to in ages that had received a phone call about, well, not a phone call, but he had a call that he went on about somebody going into an abandoned house. And when he went into the house, he said that it was very bizarre that, it was an abandoned house, been abandoned for a long time, mobile home. But inside in the living room were all these paintings, like somebody had just been painting the same thing somewhat over and over again.
Yeah.
And he said, while the entire place was trashed inside, it was just impeccable where these paintings were. And they were paintings where you would be looking up on a hill and it had a really, like funky looking, kind of scary looking dead tree with a headstone below it off to the side. And sometimes there'd be, some of them would have, a little bit more embellishments on it, some a little bit less, but they were all basically themed around this tree and this headstone. And it just kind of freaked him out.
Yeah.
He's somebody who's been around for a really long, long time, and he'd never encountered anything like that anywhere. And, you see a lot of weird things, especially when you're in rural areas.
Yeah.
You never know what you're going to see.
Yeah, and just dealing with people in general. People are just weird in general.
They are. So, so it'd be little things like that I get called about. I've assisted a few, since I retired, I've assisted a few law enforcement agencies on some of their cases where I both throw in the paranormal experience, the knowledge, and the empath, and then the law enforcement. Just kind of, it all is like, all combined in a package.
Yeah.
On some cases. Yeah. So I worked with that with a few agencies.
So in the introduction, I talked about your newest book out that just came out in June, Haunted Hill House, Where Spirits Speak. It is an infamous haunted house in the paranormal community, especially in the past 10 years or so. And like I said, Portals of Hell have been there and a few other TV shows. And so how did you get involved with the Hill House and the owners that own it now?
Well, a good friend of mine introduced me to them when they bought the house 3 years ago. I believe it was in May. And when fall came around, they were hosting like tours through the house. People do a ghost walk, and then they'd come, through, and they would have docents in each room, but just in the downstairs there'd be some equipment in there, and they would move, room to room, and they'd tell them a little bit about the history of the house or things that occurred with the room. So that's how I initially met them. And when I was hearing the stuff that they told me, that Kathy told me, some of it I was kind of rolling my eyes at, inside my head. But this was also information that they received from the person they bought the house from. They kept the names of the rooms the same as the person they bought the house from. And he had owned it for 5 years and then put it up for sale because he would no longer go on the property because of things that had happened to him. And then his health started to decline. So they bought the house. When they went in to look at the house, they both, Sonny and Kathy, actually watched a blue or green, I forget which it was, orb with their eyes during the middle of the day come floating down the stairs from upstairs, and it just kind of wafted past them and then kind of followed them. And there was something about that just drove them to buy the house. And, since they bought it, they have done all kinds of improvements. They've fixed bathrooms in there. They've added a room. They've painted. They've inside, outside. It's been leveled. The roof has been replaced. They've just done a ton of work in the 3 years they've owned this house to make it a very nice place, but also to keep it that way and try to keep it open for a place for paranormal research. And, some people go there and have fun. They might have birthday parties there, because it's more or less an event center. Somebody rents the place, they rent the whole house.
Right.
But then you also have people that are going, you have paranormal teams that go there, that run out in the middle of the night. She tells the teams or anybody who stays there, if you're too scared to sleep in the house, there's 5 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms in this house. If you're too scared to sleep in here, we have pillows and blankets so you can go sleep in your car. People sleep in their vehicles. They sleep in the kitchen on the floor. They sleep on the front porch. These are paranormal teams I'm talking about too. So it always just kind of, I don't get, if you're a paranormal team, and I think most of those teams that do that, they just want to go somewhere and they just want to get an EVP or something. And then when something real actually happens, it just freaks them out so much they flee into the night half the time. Right. It's really kind of funny how that happens. And
you said something about the different rooms, and they kept the names. Like one of the names is named after the Scratcher. It's a Scratcher room, and then there's a Shadow Man room. And so these are all based off of experiences that people have in there on a regular basis.
Right. The scratch room. It goes by, several different, things, but it's a scratch room. And it had that name when Kathy and Sonny got the house. The literature and history they got from Phil Kirchhoff, who they purchased it from, was that there had been 75 people or scratches that had occurred in that room.
Wow.
So when the first night I was there and they were doing the tours, that was the room that I was in. They always like to stick me with the worst room or the most dangerous people or whatever, which, it's no big deal to me. Give me some action.
Right.
I don't want the mundane. And, give me just it's always been like that. But so I was in there and I watched over a period of about maybe 3 or 4 hours or so. At least 24 people had claimed to have been scratched in that room. And I would say of those, I watched the scratch manifest on at least half of them.
Wow.
Sometimes they go, "Can I ask?" And if you want to, it's your, whatever. And,
right.
And guy would, and they would stick their arm out and say, "Will you scratch me?" And I'd watch the scratch appear. Some of the others, I say at least half of them because, the others like my arm or my neck's burning. And some of those were, you could tell too, but, if their arms are down where you can't see them and it's dark in the room, you have to suspect some, possibly doing it to themselves. You just have to do that, whether it happens or not. You just have to keep that, then be kind of suspicious.
At that point, it's kind of a personal experience. But when you sit there and watch it happen, that's direct evidence when there's a bunch of people that sit there and watch it happen.
Exactly. I've been in that room. The scratches have actually kind of calmed down in that room the last few months. And we don't know if, as we're discovering the history of the different events that have occurred in that house, if maybe some of the people, some of the things have kind of calmed down, or at least are calmed down for right now because their stories are being told. But I will tell you, the house is just more active than it's ever been. The activity, there may be a different type of activity, but the activity is just through the roof at this house. I have been in that room where a chair's been moved away from the table. They had like a poker table with the 4 chairs in the middle of the room. And there was a group in there one night, probably not that night, but they've done several tours and they don't do as many anymore. But we're on there. Nobody's around the table. Nobody's around the chairs. And the chair pulls out about 3 inches. And you hear the scrape across the floor. So everybody witnessed that.
Yeah, and there's I was reading your book, and there's so many reports, like every phenomenon you could think of is happening in this house. Yeah.
Yeah, where are you getting into? Are there wormholes? Is there a vortex, portal? Are they all the same? Or, what's going on? We've had, I say we just because I've been at the house so many times.
Right.
I forget, no, it's not a we, it's they. But they've had scientists come and stay and do tests. Probably one of the better episodes of shows from there was with Paul Beeben and with Paranormal Declassified when he and Tim Wood were at the house. And because they in fact, while they were there filming, they were there for several days. They started out the show, though, up north at the Demon House because there are some people who are saying that when Zach Bagans destroyed that house, whatever was there has somehow showed up, whether through mirrors or portals or who knows what, up here, up at the Haunted Hill House. Yeah, because the activity was really started ramping up about a little over 2 years ago. So that was part of what they talked about when they did their show. But I know that while they were there and they were all taking a break, they were outside smoking or whatever, and Kathy and Sonny stay in a travel trailer camper in the back of the property because people leave in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And they just leave it unlocked. But I know that they were both back in there. In fact, they were in there watching TV and the crew, everybody had come out to take a break. And behind their house is what's called East Mountain, but it's very, very heavily covered with woods, giant cactus with trunks the size of tree trunks. And so it's really difficult to move around in there if you can. They saw somebody back just inside of that area, and they assumed it was Sonny, and everybody's like waving at them. Well, the person didn't wave back. And then they discovered that Sonny and Kathy were in the camper. They don't know what that was out there.
Yeah.
So I mean, things happen. We were, Sonny and Kathy especially is looking for the basement that's supposed to be in the house. She's looking for tunnels because there's supposed to be tunnels going from the Baker Hotel to the house. And these are things that have been told to her over and over by people that have been in the house, have been in the tunnels, people that grew up in mineral wells. So it's people that usually kind of know some of those things. So she was digging through a fake fireplace in the scratch room. And so she's trying to dig down through there because they also believe one of the original wells in town is under the house. At one point, they were, ordered to seal up all the wells in town. And they think that's when they built the house over one of the original wells. They have 2 or 3 of the original wells for the city that showed up in the city over on their property. So she's digging. They're in there. They're taking rocks out, bricks out, sand out. And as they're doing that, there are about 4 or 5 of us in that room. And the floor, while she's doing that and digging in there, all of a sudden that floor starts vibrating like somebody's underneath and they're taking a broom handle or something along those lines and they're, whacking it on the ceiling like you would do if your neighbor upstairs was being too noisy.
Yeah.
And we all heard and felt that.
Wow.
And that was a big eye like, ooh.
Yeah, like they didn't want her digging there and finding whatever's under there.
Exactly. Exactly.
So as far as the house, what kind of history have they uncovered? I know there's lots of stories about it being a brothel and all this other stuff. And like you said, it's close to the Baker Hotel. So what kind of history have they uncovered of what they can prove about the history of the house?
Well, they can prove that history. They can prove a good example of that would be Gypsy comes and has been there a few times. She has zero discrimination, and you can find her on YouTube like Gypsy Jewel or zero discrimination. But she's a very experienced metal detector, and she works with law enforcement. And she's in fact on some of the Prometheus entertainment shows, like some of the Digging for Gold and so on shows.
Yeah, she's
on there, so she's been there several times, and twice while she's been there, she has uncovered the metal cases. So back in the 20s or 30s, they had condom cases that were metal, and they had it was a reusable condom back then. so I know, gross, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but she's found 2 of those cases, and those cases are something because they're delicate that are very unusual to find. Anywhere. That's not an easy find. Those have been found on the property. There was a little bitty handwritten kind of like porno book that was found out on the property. It's one of those things that even back during that time period, the Navy had banned. It's one of those that would get banned from like being taken on ships. And I mean, there's a whole fascinating history with all that sort of stuff. So they have found things like that. Documentation. She knows, who lived there, where they died, where they're buried, some of them how they died. The children, like Joshua and Jacob, they know the names, their full names. They know when they're born. And these are all through census figures, through, grave sites, different things like that. Some of the stuff, like why they don't really know exactly when the house was built, is there was a great fire in that area that in Mineral Wells that destroyed a lot of those records.
Yeah.
A long time ago. So all that was lost. And when they bought, they thought it was, built in 1890, but it's more 1870 even, possibly. There's somebody who, Donna McCauley, is a historian for a local county and city, and she's done a lot of, the historical research on the house because they're working actually to get a historical marker and designation from the state. So they have to have documentation for all that. We know people who died in the house and the murders. Of course, you can't, because of the fire, it's not like you can go to like the local newspaper, say, and look through their morgue and try to find old stories.
Yeah.
This is something that you have to go to a Fort Worth or Dallas newspaper to find information, because those are the, Fort Worth is the closest large city with a newspaper. You just have to kind of be creative about some of that. So those people that the stories are told about, there's documentation that they did live. We do know their names. If you go over to the Crazy Water in Mineral Wells, which is a well, and they sell the crazy water and all that, and read their history, it's more of a rose-colored history, sort of, because they claim they were the first well in the city. Well, they were not. And they talk about the fact that a lady started drinking the mineral water, and she was crazy, and it kind of made her normal. Well, the lady they're talking about is the lady who lived in this house, in Hill House. Her sister owned the house, and she lived there. So, and I've got her information is in the book too. And, there's pictures of some of the owners. There's pictures of their headstones and their death certificates. And there's a lot more stuff. I had stuff that was sent to me in so many different ways that trying to go back and track everything has been almost impossible. But I have a ton of research that I have. And in fact, it was so much, this book went from one book into the series, just because there's more than you can put in one book.
Yeah. And the house it would have been considered a mansion back then. It's a pretty good sized house.
It is. And the man who built the house, his brother also had almost a carbon copy of the house, a couple of, on the same street, but it's like, on a block over or so. But yeah, I mean, that's a big house. And it's just catty corner from the baker. So it's really close. Across from the baker on one side is a church. And then there's an empty lot that they also own next to the church that something had been on. And then there was a house on there up until just before Kathy and Sonny bought the land, and the city had actually torn it down illegally, so to speak. And but that had been a drug house, a cartel house. And speaking to people within law enforcement in the area, they had confirmed there's been at least 8 murders on that empty lot right now. So that hasn't even really been investigated at all.
Wow, that's a lot for a small town.
Now, that town has a lot of stuff, and whether water, limestone, crystals, everything, and the whole, because the tunnels ran more than just to there. Went to the church. There was tunnels all over in there. And people that had lived there before were into some of them were into the occult, they have said, and there were a lot of other people that were into that, and there's all kinds of stories about that in a park in town where they used to do rituals and sacrifices. I mean, there's so much just with the whole town in general. It's bizarre, really.
Yeah, it's interesting, these different towns like that around the U.S. and these different pockets of places that draw people like that. Like Sedona, Arizona is one of those that draws like all these spiritual people. And then you've got the place in Florida where all the entire town, everybody's a psychic or a medium.
Yeah, that's Casadega. Yeah, and that's a great place. I like it.
But there's just like these spiritual centers that just draw all these people, and it doesn't just draw the good people; it also draws the people with ill intentions, like you were saying with the occult and that type of stuff.
Yeah, it does. And I've been to Sedona. I was to Sedona a couple of years ago, and I really was not impressed. It is so expensive there, so touristy, overpriced, and it was full of just all of these. I didn't like it at all, really. I did go up on one of the, I went up on the Airport Vortex just because, if I'm there, I'm going to at least climb on one of them.
Yeah.
And see. And it may have been one of the most crowded because it was the easiest to get to. But yeah, people were snooty, but in the shops and the people that were there, buying high priced things. I'm sure that what would be good in Sedona is where the locals go.
Right.
And I wasn't there long enough to do that, but that's when I was actually staying over in the Chaco Canyon area in New Mexico. And that has, and in the national park over there, that has Sedona beat hands down as far as vibrations and just everything. And there's hardly anybody out there. It's perfect.
Yeah.
And that place is amazing there. That is one that I want to go back to and spend some time.
Yeah, I was just watching a documentary about the Pueblo people in Chaco Canyon and the places that they built, and why they think they built them, but they're not for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a pretty good. Was it the one on Amazon?
Yeah.
And then let me tell you that Pueblo Bonito, when I went through there, because I was surprised when I was there that you could go wander through it. I didn't even make it through all of it. Maybe about half of it, and that took quite a few hours. But you can feel the vibrations, and the canyon itself is much more than just the park. It's probably a couple square miles or so as it is, because I was staying 22 miles from the park, and that whole area, I mean, you could just feel the vibrations. It was an amazing place.
Yeah.
Of course, I was staying in the middle of nowhere. There was no electricity or anything, so it's perfect for sky watching and everything else.
Yeah, and it's amazing when you get out somewhere like that, how much of the sky you can actually see when you live near a city or, something like that with all the light pollution.
Exactly. Yeah, because you can go out there, you can see the satellites go by, you can see the ISS go by, just see a lot of things out there. And, you never know what else you're going to see either when you're somewhere like that.
Right. Yeah, UFOs, UAPs, yeah.
Yep.
So
you never know.
With the house, there's still, I thought it was interesting that there's still some disappearances that have been unsolved that are kind of connected with the house in that area. Like you're saying with all the murders, the 8 different murders that they know of. And now there's a lady who's missing, kind of a cold case. And they think that she might have been killed there as well.
Yeah, well, you have one lady who was last seen at the house. And so that case is, 12 years old now or so. It's still an open case. But she was last seen at that house, and she was friends with people who lived at that house. And there's a photograph of her in front of the house the day she went missing. They found her body a year later, most of it. It was out in a pasture, out in a field, and somebody kind of stumbled on it. So trying to determine a lot of stuff with with some bones is very difficult. But then there's also another lady that went missing about a year after she did, from a different location, not from that house. But she also knew those people. And both of the women, they have had property of theirs found on the Haunted Hill House property, and it's been identified by family members. There's a detective with Bexar County Sheriff's Department, which covers San Antonio, that area of Texas.
Yeah.
And he does he's into the paranormal. He's written a book called Detecting the Paranormal. And we're at a lot of the same events speaking together, not together, but we're both speaking. And he has spent the night in this house. He brought his dog, and he had a canine dog, he brought to spend the night at that house. He will never, and he was by himself, his name is Greg Lawson, and he will never spend the night at that house alone. He'll go spend the night there. But while he was there, they found a pocket knife that was kind of unique that had belonged to one of the girls' fathers on the property. But while he was there, he had pebbles being thrown at him from upstairs. And he spent almost the whole night chasing the sounds of breaking glass. And there had been a slaughterhouse in the back of the part of the property at one time too. So when he had his dog out there, the dog kind of became overwhelmed too. And that dog is just not recovered from that house yet.
Wow.
And there have been some canines brought out. The same canines that actually found the bones of one of the missing women that law enforcement called out, they were called out about a year ago on the property to do a search. And they were hitting possibly on some areas where there could be somebody buried or something, and then they've actually, Kathy and Sonny have actually brought in an excavator to try and locate some items or bodies or something where the dogs had hit. And, nothing has been found yet, but when you dig, you could be 1 inch, 2 inches off.
Right.
And you're digging and not find. While Portals to Hell were there, they did some LiDAR scans on one side of the house and had pointed out 3 areas that they found with possible metal boxes or something shaped like a box buried about 8 foot deep. And that's why, they were digging over there, and there were some things that were found that were like big old metal pieces from a long time ago. So those haven't been there. And the reason they were doing that is there's one man sitting in prison right now who confessed to the murder of his girlfriend, and that's the one who went missing about a year after the person that's with the unsolved case.
Yeah.
And he confessed to her murder. He is in prison right now, but he refuses to say what he did with her and where she is buried, other than he has said that he had chopped her up and put her in several different boxes or, whatever. So in a way, they're trying to find her.
Yeah.
And because he won't tell anybody why, where she is and why, I don't know, but he won't say. Yeah, a piece of her jewelry has been found on the property.
It's just crazy that we're talking about the same property with all of this going on. Not just the paranormal stuff, but all of this stuff with people going missing and murders and one of the previous tenants who lived there, I believe she lived there for like 19 years. She was a kid when they moved in and had some extraordinary experiences. And even her mother was into the occult as well.
Yeah, because I put part of the interview with her is in the book as well. And it was it was a rather lengthy interview. And a good portion of it is in the book. There will probably be more of it in the next book in the series. But yeah. I mean, that's what, and she's not the only one that said that. Other people that knew the family have said that. And, I talked to a boyfriend who lived there for several weeks and then he had to leave because he couldn't take it. He couldn't take the activity in the house. So these are not made up stories. This is very real. And when people do book the place for the night, they don't allow children there. They make sure people understand that it's not a beginner's location.
Right.
But yet, a lot of times, really, it seems like based on your intentions when you go there, you may just have a wonderful time.
Yeah.
You may just interact with the children that were murdered that are still around in the house. And now things don't stay permanent in that house. The stuff does come and go. So it's not like they've done anything to keep things at the house. Everything's, it's free to come and go. Although if it follows somebody home, which it has done occasionally, sometimes, a few times people have actually had to go drive back to the house and bring the spirit back with them.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I know it's funny, but it's not so funny for the person who,
right.
Yeah, having activity in their house when they've never had activity before.
One of the other interesting reoccurring things that happen to people is having weird, vivid dreams of the house.
Yeah. I know that is really odd because a lot of times people who have never been to the house that are planning on coming to the house will start having dreams of the house and some of the activity in the house. And a lot of people will do that once they leave the house. They'll have dreams after they leave. Of course, some of them have the dreams while they're there. But yeah, it's fun. It's interesting how people have dreams of this house and they've never been there.
Yeah.
I think that's fairly unique. I haven't heard of that happening that often about locations, unless maybe it's somebody, a medium, so to speak, or something who's trying to get a reading of the place or something.
Right.
A lot of times these are just normal people. Sometimes they're people that really have never been anywhere paranormal and don't really know a whole lot about it. They just know they're coming to that house.
Yeah. One of the other things that I find that is awesome about this house as a paranormal hotspot is the documentation that has been done of all the different things that have happened. You don't get that with a lot of locations. They don't necessarily keep all of this detailed documentation of what people have reported over the years.
Right. And that's Kathy's, that's one of her main deals with the house is to keep this documentation and information with the house. And she knows more than I do. I mean, some of it, I have it in all my, researching in papers, but she just is right there in her head. And she'll know exactly where to go, where to go. She's got, first, middle, last names, birth dates, death dates, etc. on the house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when she first bought the house, we both had a mutual friend, and that's Maria Elena Santos Kemp, who is a psychic medium. And so they already knew each other, which is kind of, was a roundabout way that I got to know them. And Kathy talks about when they first bought the house and they were having it leveled almost. That's one of the first things they did. She's sitting in what is now is Priscilla's room, but that had been a semi-enclosed porch.
Yeah.
With possibly the entrance to the basement is underneath the concrete. That's one of the possible locations. But she's sitting up there, and there's a wheelbarrow, and the men are, digging and doing the stuff to level the house on one side. And all of a sudden, this wheelbarrow goes flying through the air at her.
Wow.
It's funny when she tells the story, because first thing she did was call Maria, and tells Maria what happens, and Maria's response to her was simple, like, "Well, you bought a haunted house. What did you expect?"
Right.
And she just and Kathy's response was, "Well, I thought I'd see orbs or something,
Yeah.
She was like, "I didn't know something could be thrown at me." There's been at least one worker at one time that fell off the roof, not while they owned it, but prior to that fell off the roof and died.
Wow.
Because it's a really, steep pitched roof.
Yeah.
And all. Yeah, there was a cowboy that was drunk and fell in one of the wells and drowned. And they did pull him out, though. And then there you've got the story of a jewel thief, because East Mountain is one known for treasure hunting with Sam Bass, that he possibly buried his gold up there in one of the small caves. But there was a jewel thief that robbed a jewelry store and went up there to hide his jewels, and somewhere up there and in a crevice, and a boulder supposedly, was knocked loose and rolled over the opening, and he died up there, and he's still there. So
yeah.
You have it all over there. And then there's also stuff about, there's something outside that stays outside that is an entity. It's not a spirit. It was never human, but it's very old and it's very ancient. And you can sometimes see it. You can definitely feel it. And then you have some UFO activity that's occurred around there as well. It just is a weird spot.
Yeah.
And I think that at one point, I know that a ley line goes through the house, but I think there's an intersection on the property of ley lines.
Yeah, and that's reported with a lot of places with that, especially report all the different types of activity like UFOs and cryptids and hauntings and kind of the whole gamut of paranormal stuff. That's one of the themes that I've seen at different locations.
Yeah, I've never been anywhere like it. I've been a lot of different places, but I've never been to a place quite like this house.
So earlier you were talking about, pretty much the first night you were there as a docent, kind of helping with the public coming through, and you saw the scratches appear. What other personal experiences have you had in the house?
Well, initially I would not stay in the house, but then after about 3 or 4 months, I started staying in the house, and Kathy and Sonny would stay sometimes in the house, and it would just be us. And I've been in the house a number of times when there's been a group of people, in the house, but I've been there a number of times by myself. And most of the activity that I've had when I've been there at night, it's when I've been by myself, or maybe Sonny and Kathy were back in the camper.
Yeah.
But they still, but they weren't in the house. One night, about 4 o'clock in the morning, the piano that's in the living room, it woke me up. It was like a child was taking their whole hand and just, like they'll go by a piano and just bam, 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 with their hands making noise.
Yeah.
Well, that woke me up. And the person I interviewed about the house that lived there so long, that used to be in her bedroom, and she got it moved out to the living room because it used to wake her up. And since then, there's been not tons of people, but there's been a few people, including Kathy, that have heard like one of the high keys, just kind of like, ding. They'll hear that occasionally come from the piano. So I heard that. I was by myself in the house. Let's see. I've had, I think I was in there by myself. Had come from the back of the house and was going through the living room towards the kitchen. And there's a door that you can close off the living room from the hall and that portion of the house.
Yeah.
And as I'm going through, getting ready to go through, that door swings, and I wouldn't say slams, but it was forcefully shut. And then maybe 30 seconds after that, when I'm kind of standing there like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. So, all this process is going through my head. I turn around and the door to the scratch room had been closed. I watch it open.
Wow.
So that's when I go, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
You just, because a lot of that doesn't, send me running from the house. I've heard audible things. Of course, when I'm there, I stay in the X room, and the bed is right by the door, and that door is right by the front door, and it's right by the stairs. And I keep that door open so I can hear things.
Yeah.
And you hear residual going on. You'll hear what sounds like partying in the living room. You'll hear people going up and down, or probably guys, because it sounds more like boots, up and down the stairs all night long. You can hear pacing upstairs. You can hear sometimes the boots like really loud up there. So you hear all that residual stuff going on. But I've had times where, Toby is the one that does most of the hissing and the growling. And like on my TikToks, they'll send me videos of customers that were in the house that they caught on their security camera, Sunny Will, and I'll put those on my TikTok. So, and it's always that voice. Toby just has this voice. And I woke up to the sound of his hissing in my ear, and I just ignored it and went back to sleep. Another time I went to lay down, so I was still wide awake. I was just hadn't even started getting comfortable, but my eyes were closed. And as I'm laying down, and before you know it, Toby's like, we're like nose to nose if he has a nose, and he's hissing and growling at me. And it's like you could feel the spittle on your face and kind of blow your hair. I just ignored it, I just ignore it, and I think he's almost like it's almost like a child act when they're trying to poke you, trying to get you to, because they're trying to do something and you're ignoring them, and they'll get a little worse and a little worse and a little worse. And then, of course, the worst was when I spent 3 days at the house on my second night there, when I was doing stuff for the book, is when I had the hiss, growl, yell, roar combo thing come from upstairs that was loud enough that it vibrated the whole house.
Wow.
That was a little unnerving.
Yeah, I would say so.
But it's funny because I get up because I'm at the kitchen table. I get up and I run to the hall and I look upstairs and I just yell like, "What? I heard you. What? What's your point? Why? What?" And I never got an answer. But the next day I had asked when I went upstairs for something. Up at Toby's room, I had to pass, and the security camera will grab the audio and the video. And I had asked Toby if that was, if he was the one that did that, and the response immediately back was, "Yep." So, and they had picked one up from the night before too, when I passed by and triggered one of the security cameras. That they get amazing stuff on their security cameras. They have about a half a dozen or so that have audio. The rest are all video. But it's amazing what shows up in the audio. And there's one that said, like, "Look, Toby made her turn red, made her face turn red." So
he was just trying to get a rise out of you, and finally did.
Yeah, but it didn't scare me and make me run away going, "Ah!"
Yeah.
I just yelled at him for, like, what? What's the deal?
Yeah.
What?
So, like you said when we started talking, this is your first book about Haunted Hill House in a series, and this one just came out in June. So, what do you have planned for the next few books in the series?
Well, the one book I know will be probably just strictly paranormal, things that have occurred, things that have happened to other people, just all paranormal events, more or less. And another book is going to delve into all the murders in detail.
Yeah.
So whether, so there's at least 3 in this series. I'm not sure if there will be more than that, but I know that there will be 3.
Awesome. I definitely enjoyed this book, Haunted Hill House, Where Spirits Speak. And like I said, everybody can find it on Amazon or on Kindle. Also at your website, marthadecker.com. And with doing the books, do you have anything else in the works?
I do. I have one book, that's already out called Paranormal Profiling. I'm trying to get Amazon to pull that book down because right now it's a copyright infringement. I've been out of contract for 2 years with a publisher of that book. And I am going to be putting out, hopefully by the end of August, I'll have Paranormal Profiling 2, which is, it's a book about how to interview people, how to look for signs of deception, you know, a lot of the stuff that was law enforcement that's been translated over into paranormal, and it'll be an advanced version. And so that's coming up. I will be, I will be in Little Rock, Arkansas over Halloween at a Arkansas Paranormal Expo. Then I will be in Jefferson, Texas, the first weekend of November at the History, Haunts, and Legends. I'm not sure if I'm going to be anywhere else. I've recently done, you know, a number of radio shows. And as far as places, right now, I don't have any place to go in the works.
Yeah.
You know, I'm kind of looking for someplace else to go, whether to experience or to, you know, write another, you know, book about. I'm kind of open right now. I'm kind of, you know, footloose and fancy free, so to speak, right now, which is kind of good. I've been so focused on this book that it took almost 2 years, and that's because the more information we had, the more, you know, the more you look, the more you find, the more you look, the more you find.
Right.
And it was kind of a daunting thing to even, you know, where do I begin to write this? So that's why I finally came to the friend of mine is the one that talked me into doing it in the series. I go, well, that's easy now. And we, you know, I kind of, you know, I got the first part out.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll definitely looking forward to the next two. I as the listeners have heard me say many times, I love true crime as well. And when the two paranormal and true crime cross over, that's kind of my favorite area of the genres.
Yeah. Oh, and me too. Me too. I have one county that has a very interesting unsolved murder that hopefully they're going to be able to solve. But I was called to maybe possibly assist. I brought my, you know, everything, the paranormal, the detective, all that together one day. But what was interesting was when I got out to the crime scene, there was a fire involved. And when I went out there, it was the first time for me that I could actually feel the fire.
Wow.
Probably. And I think that if I had not been a volunteer firefighter for a number of years and, you know, been, you know, on grass fires and structure fires and all of that, I might not have noticed it. But when you go into an area that's already burned, say it's a grass fire, wildland fire, and it's already burned but still smoldering, there's just a feel to it. There's a certain type of heat that you can feel. And when I went into that area, I mean, I felt it big time, like it was just happening right then. And that was the first time that I experienced it like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, if I can help more people that way, that would be amazing to me.
Yeah.
To be able to help on something like that.
Well, and to bring together all your training plus the intuition and empathy and all of that, you know, to help people is, I think it's an awesome thing. And I think a lot of us, I know part of now I understand years later after being an EMS, but I think I was drawn to that world because I was already an empath. And I think it definitely served me well, you know, in emergency situations and trying to figure out what's wrong with people. The same as you've been talking about, you know, it served you in the law enforcement community of listening to your gut and having that intuition of knowing, you know, things that you necessarily aren't supposed to know, you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Sometimes you just know, you don't know how you know, you just know, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, it took my husband a few years to stop asking me, well, how do you know? I go, I don't know. I just know.
Right.
You know, it's not that it happens a lot, but it does. And I think it served me well. And I think part of everything that I had done up to being in law enforcement led me to that path because it was a path that I could use everything that I had, all my experience through the years of everything I had done, I could apply it all to that.
Yeah.
And it felt it was the right path. You know, I could use my scuba diving. I could use, I mean, you name it, I could use all of it there. Even my journalism part I could use because there were a few guys when I go through the reports, they'd set their report, a legal pad, and a highlighter on top of their report. and because they knew, but, you know, so we had a lot of young guys, you know, not a lot of, you know, education. And one of the things I did with that was, well, one of the things that Chief and I did was all about getting them as much education as we could, which is part of the reason why I stayed at the smaller department as long as I did, because most of those guys in law enforcement have to, they have to fight for anything other than the mandated training.
Yeah.
And we were all about the training. So, we had one guy that at one point that when he first came in, he was using words like shooken and tooken and all these words that were, not just incorrect grammar. They didn't exist.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it from the point that I'd like to get him to the point where he could go on to a larger department and he could sound, somewhat intelligent.
Right.
So I was able to take the time, but also is because you go through and you approve reports and you look through for mistakes. You actually look through reports also that are written. You would look as if you were a defense attorney. What's in there that could, set off a defense attorney? We had one officer that she would write, I walked in the door, I looked to the left and saw, I looked to the right and saw, I looked straight ahead and saw. And it's like, no, I walked into the living room. This is what I saw.
Yeah.
Because it was so specific. It was too specific. And you're going to get tied up with a defense attorney big time, and possibly some suspect, who's guilty, is going to get off based on the fact that you're so specific.
Right.
Because, nobody can be that specific of every little minute detail in the exact order that you did it.
Right.
Like it at all, really. And so, it was, used everything like that.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I enjoyed about your book is that you kind of take that approach to your book and your writing as well. I really appreciate the very matter of fact and the way that you put the interviews in there and that type of stuff, because it's more straight from the people instead of just some author writing their own narrative of what the people told them or whatever. And so, bringing all that training to the paranormal world, I think is great. And that's one of the reasons I want to have you on today and talk to you, is because of that unique view that you have and the way that you approach the paranormal. Thank
you. Well, that was the whole idea, is putting it in their words. They're speaking in their words what they experience, and even with the people that were in there with their personal experiences. I leave everything. I don't want to change their words because they're telling their story.
Yeah.
And I want the story told the way they told it. If they were as if they were sitting there across from you telling you the story while you're reading it.
Yeah.
So, there may be some grammar that's not correct, but it's in their, especially, interview, but it's in their words. It's in their words.
Yeah. Yeah. And also having accounts like that, I think are important, because I've talked about this on the show many times as well. And you know this from being an investigator, you can have 10 people in a room and see the same entity, but everybody will describe it differently because everybody's had a different experience. And so, to get those exact experiences, I think is important. And also all the research that you put into the house and the book and the stories, and getting that in there, because the research and knowing what you're getting into is important to kind of help explain the hauntings and who was there and try to make sense of all this crazy paranormal stuff.
Right. Which I don't know if we'll ever make sense of it all, but we can try at least.
Yeah.
At least have it make sense if somebody's, interested in finding out about it.
Yeah. Well, Martha, it's been a great conversation with you today. I appreciate you coming on.
You bet. I appreciate you having me on.
And like I said, everybody, you can find Martha's books on Amazon, Kindle, and wherever fine books are sold. And you're on Facebook and TikTok and all the social media. And they can find you at marthadecker.com as well.
Right.
All right. Well, everybody, as always, stay safe out there. Have a good day. Join us next time for a new episode of The Unseen Paranormal. Until then, head over to the Unseen Paranormal Lounge on Facebook for all the latest updates and discussions about the show. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, or at unseenparanormalpodcast.com. And please rate, review, share, and subscribe to help more people discover the show. The Unseen Paranormal Podcast is proud to be the ambassador for paranormal for Verbal.com. A big thank you to my friend Chris Lips for the awesome theme music. You can find more of his music on Apple, Amazon, or Spotify. And as always, thank you for listening.
You have come end of the line.